Do you want an army that looks impressive on the table, can be painted relatively quickly, and helps you improve your painting skills, all without using an airbrush or Slapchop? Then this tutorial is for you. Welcome to my channel. Today, I'll be painting a Death Korps of Krieg using simple layering techniques. First of all, the most important step is choosing the right color palette. You want colors that work well together and create strong contrast while using as few paints as possible. For example, since the blue greatcoat is the dominant feature of a Krieg model, I've paired it with an orange desert base. In this video, I'll be painting these two guys. Let's start with the coats. I begin by mixing Abaddon black with abyssal turquoise and use that as my base coat. Next, I switch to pure abyssal turquoise and build up the midtones, leaving the deepest recesses and the back of the miniature untouched. Since we're painting an army, not a single miniature, I won't worry too much about realistic lighting. I'll keep the light source in mind, but mostly follow the shapes and folds of the miniature. Finally, I use Thunderhawk blue for the highlights, focusing mainly on the folds and the areas facing the sky. Next, let's paint the boots and all the leather details, including the belts and backpack. I base coat everything with dark rust. Then mix it with parasite brown and paint the raised areas. Finally, I add a little bit of ice yellow to the mix for the edge highlights, along with a few small scratches here and there to give the leather a worn look. Now I paint the leg wraps and the rolled cloth on the backpack. I base coat them with Steel Legion drab. Then I add a single highlight with Zandri dust. Finally, I use a mix of both colors to create a quick wet blend on the sides of the rolled cloth. Moving on to the trousers and armor. I start by mixing Abaddon black with a little bit of green-gray and base coat both the trousers and the armor. Then, I increase the amount of green-gray to roughly a 50-50 mix and paint a smaller area. Finally, I switch to pure green-gray and paint an even smaller area towards the light source. If you want your miniatures to look great without relying on an airbrush or spending hours blending and glazing, this is the key. Paint texture instead of chasing perfectly smooth transitions. With each lighter layer, cover a smaller area toward the light source, using brush strokes to build the texture of the fabric or subtle scratches and stippling on the armor. It's faster, easier, and still looks great. To make the armor stand out, I push the highlights a bit further by using a 50-50 mix of green-gray and ice yellow. Finally, I use pure ice yellow for the crisp final highlights. Think of this as the first step towards learning how to paint non-metallic metal. Now let's paint the weapons really quickly. I start by mixing a little bit of Runelord brass into Abaddon black and use that as the base coat for all the weapons and the gas mask filters. Then, I add more Runelord brass to create a 50-50 mix and paint smaller areas towards the light source. To finish, I use pure Runelord brass for the edge highlights, then add a few scratches here and there. The gold details are painted in a very similar way. I start with a mix of Abaddon black and a little bit of Gehenna's gold. Then, I add more Gehenna's gold for the next layer. Next, I add small highlights of Liberator gold. Finally, once the weapons are dry, I wash them with Reikland Flesh Shade. For the gas mask, I'm using Deathguard green. Again, I mix a little bit of it into Abaddon black and use that as the base coat for the entire mask and hose. Then, I make a 50-50 mix of the two paints and layer it over the raised areas, keeping the shadows dark. To finish, I use pure Deathguard green on the front of the mask and the edges of the hose ribs. Now it's time to grab a makeup sponge and have some fun painting the OSL. First, I lightly dampen the sponge and dip it into moot green. I gently dab it onto the plasma coils, the vents, and any nearby surfaces the plasma would illuminate. Use very little pressure and build up the glow with several light passes. For the areas the sponge can't reach, I switch to a brush and use a few thin glazes to extend the glow. I also use the brush to recreate the stippled texture on the armor. Then, I repeat the process with lime green, focusing on a smaller area. Next, I bring in some white. I paint a small dot in each of the gas mask lenses, then thin the paint down and let it flow into the plasma coils and the vents. Give it at least 2 thin coats to really make it pop. After that, I mix the white with lime green, thin it down, and glaze it over the white on the plasma gun. Then I glaze both the lenses and the surrounding area with diluted moot green. Next, I apply another glaze of lime green, focusing only on the front of the lenses around the white dots to create a brighter focal point. Finally, I take the mix of white and lime green and pick out the armor edges and fabric folds closest to the plasma gun. With that, the painting is done, but there are still 2 steps left. First, I make a simple pigment wash by mixing water, thinner medium, and burnt sienna pigment. I apply it all over the base, adding a lighter rust pigment toward the front to subtly separate the lit and shadowed areas. Then, while it's still slightly wet, I lightly dust the base and the lower half of the miniature with the pigments using a dry brush. And now, the final and most satisfying step of them all. Rimming. Just paint a smooth coat of Abaddon black around the base rim. And with that, here are the finished Death Korps of Krieg. I hope you enjoyed the video and found this tutorial helpful. If so, please leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram for more content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.